Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. We're about to crack into the more entertaining titles of 1998, in my opinion at least. If you want my thoughts on Asian horror trends and other events from this year, you could check out part 1 of this video. But before we begin, I have an honorable mention. I plan on doing this as necessary in future videos because there are many contemporary Asian movies that some people will classify as horror films, but I do not. So I'm going to very briefly mention such films at the start of my videos, beginning with this video. Because if I don't, I'm sure that I will be receiving comments asking why I didn't cover them, especially if they're popular. One such moderately popular film from 1998 is The Quiet Family from South Korea, which I classify as a comedy with a few horror elements mixed in. If you have not seen The Quiet Family, I definitely recommend it because it's a good film. At some point, maybe I'll do a separate review on my YouTube channel of that one. It's a good flick. So let's get started here. And remember, all of the films I discuss will be listed in the description box below. So the first entertaining Asian horror film from 1998 that we will cover is Azarak 3, Misa, the Dark Angel. It's a Japanese horror film. Now in this one, a group of schoolgirls attempt to survive a sacrificial rite in an isolated school building. Now from what I remember here, these girls are rehearsing a stage play that references a homunculus, which is basically a soulless man-made life form. It's always interesting to see a Japanese horror film touch upon non-Japanese mythos and alchemy, and that's basically what this is. The homunculus was popularized, I believe, in 16th century alchemy, and eventually in 19th century fiction works. Now, with regard to the film itself, Azarak 3 gets trashed quite a bit online. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Not many people seem to like this one that much, but I do. I will admit that this isn't necessarily the highest quality film in the world, mostly due to its somewhat awkward acting and clunky script at times. At times it just feels a little off. However, the atmosphere is a real keeper in this one, I believe. The lighting is a mix of blue hues and soft whites for the most part, and the camera work is also very soft, as I describe, which basically means that the images, in some cases, they lack sharp imagery. You know, everything looks kind of faded and a bit fuzzy. That just seems to be the, I don't know if it was the cameras they used or the cinematography or what, but regardless, this type of an aesthetic gives a very dreamy feel to this film, which I really like, and I think it works given the plot and the premise here. Now, the death scenes are mostly tame, but there are some interesting moments involving hallucinations and otherworldly phenomena. As an added bonus, deformed zombie-like creatures roam the grounds from time to time. There's also an interesting twist that revolves around the stage play itself, which I really enjoyed. Now, some people, as I said, don't really like this one. Some people find it a bit boring, but I like it, and I really get the urge to rewatch it fairly frequently, so that must say something. I think the budget on this one just seemed a bit lower than the first two films in this franchise, and maybe that's something else that kind of rubs people the wrong way, but I like this one. Viewers who enjoy odd, low-budget projects may like it. Now, DVD availability of Misa the Dark Angel is that it is widely available on DVD. Now, our next film here is a callback to those samurai horror films from the 50s and 60s. We haven't covered one of those in a while. Not too many samurai-themed horror films from Japan in recent years, but this is one of them, and that is The Haunted Lantern, a Japanese horror romance. Now in this film, a ronin woos a woman, but unfortunate events lead to ghostly phenomena that attempt to coerce an ancient promise made during his previous life. Now what was this promise exactly? Well, the film tells us early on. In his prior life, he was a young man who was traveling with his fiancée when they were cornered by a group of vicious Ronin. They agreed to commit suicide together, in fear of what would happen to them if they were captured alive. But the man wimps out while the woman killed herself. So fast forward one reincarnation cycle, and retribution may be awaiting our protagonist. So this is executed in a very traditional, old-school style that's similar to many of the films we covered during the first few installments of this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist. When we were covering the 50s and 60s, this harks back to that. There's also a lot of time spent developing the dramatic and romantic elements, which obviously helps matters. Not a particularly scary film, though, I would say, but the suicide scenes do get a bit bloody, so just beware of that. Overall, I think this is quality stuff, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I've read that this film is actually based on an old Japanese tale, which was initially performed in a stage play style hundreds of years ago. So, this is one to put on your radar, especially if you really enjoy those old school Japanese samurai horror films and you feel like getting into a, I guess, more modern style, but that a film that is still, consistent with the ones from decades ago. Check out The Haunted Lantern. It's a good flick. And DVD availability of The Haunted Lantern, it is also widely available. So we're in luck so far tonight. Now next, we have the third installment of the Troublesome Night series. That's Troublesome Night III, a Hong Kong horror comedy anthology. Now this anthology is quite surprising due to its solid script writing and focus on character interaction to supplement the horror elements. Now if you've followed me over my past few videos, you know that the Troublesome Night franchise is very hit or miss, and it's mostly miss for the most part. But this is a good one. Now the first story is about a funeral manager, played by Louis Koo, of course, who deals with the difficulties in his business. A young pop idol's disfigured corpse arrives, which inspires one of Koo's employees to give her a beautiful funeral. Well, that's nice. Now in this one, the characters are quite likable, and the ending is particularly interesting. So I really like the first installment of this Troublesome Night 3. It's one of the better installments from the first handful of Troublesome Night films. Now, the second story maintains that momentum. It's about 3 con artists who get possessed by a pissed-off spirit because they overcharged her granddaughter for worship. Well, these guys are going to get what they deserve, as I sometimes say. Now, this one incorporates some humor, and again, if you followed some of my previous videos, you know that Hong Kong horror comedies can get pretty sketchy at times, but the humor in this one is actually pretty good. And it has a very crazy finale, which is quite enjoyable. Sometimes the humor in these Hong Kong horror comedies works, and this is a good example of that. Now, the third story is sort of an extended ending of what happened previously in the first 2 segments, but it has a more serious romantic tone to it. And most surprisingly, the shifting of tones in this anthology is executed fairly well. So, the third segment is a little bit more, I guess, melancholy and dramatic in some ways. So, Troublesome Night 3 is probably the best of the entire series, in my opinion. I think this is the one that I enjoy the most out of the ones that I've seen. I think I've seen like 10 installments. Mostly because every story in this anthology is legitimately entertaining. So, even in some of the installments I've recommended before, there'd be maybe 1 or 2 good segments out of 3, but there would always be one that just wasn't that good. This is a consistently good anthology. So if you're interested in this franchise, I would recommend that you start with Troublesome Night 3. Start with this one, because it's the one that I think is the best. And then if you like it, then move on to some of the other ones that I recommend. Then if you like those, then move on to the ones that I don't recommend, because maybe you'll like them. So Troublesome Night 3, unfortunately though, is difficult to find. I know it used to be widely available on DVD, but in recent years it's become more difficult. You might be able to find it on YouTube. I checked YouTube, but it was not on YouTube when I checked a few days ago. But keep your eyes out for it if you want to check it out. Alright, the next film here is another Hanako-san film. And it is called Shinsei Toire no Hanako-san, also known as Toilet Hanako-san New Student, a Japanese horror film. Now, we previously covered a film from 1995 entitled Hanako, Phantom of the Toilet, which concerned grammar school kids. The film we are covering now concerns junior high students. So they're a little bit older, not quite high school level, but in between grammar school and high school level in terms of age. Now, this is based on the same Japanese legend of Hanako-san, a spirit that haunts the restrooms of schools, but is obviously a bit different due to the differences in age of our protagonists. Now, in terms of mood and style, this reminded me a bit of the South Korean film Whispering Corridors, which also came out the same year and we will be covering later on in this video. But this has a few bells and whistles that gives it its own flavor. For example, the hauntings are very different from most J-horror ghost films because there are lots of wind and bright lights that are showcased. You don't see that too much in Japanese horror. The style here is a bit different. One of the prior Japanese horror films that I would compare this to a little bit would be Kiyoshi Kurosawa's film Sweet Home, which had kind of poltergeists and some bright lighting near the end with some wind effects. So if you've seen that film, like the end of that film is kind of similar to the style of this film. And this is yet another piece of evidence that you can't toss all Japanese ghost films into the same bucket, because even within the subgenre of ghost films, you get a variety of styles. This is nothing like, Ringu or any of those flicks. Now, the scoring in this film is quite memorable, actually, and it has a theme tune that has a nice, creepy jingle to it. This is overall a quality, creepy ghost film involving rather young kids, junior high school kids, and it's also an early film by director Yukihiko Tsutsumi, who has subsequently given us some very impressive stuff, such as 2LDK from 2002 and Beck from 2010. He also created the Trick television series, which is just outstanding, and he also directed some of the Trick spin-off films. I'm definitely going to cover the Trick series at some point. Tsutsumi was also quite popular for engaging in a director duel with Ryuhei Kitamura. They challenged one another to make a film that incorporated like 3 characters at most, and would be filmed in only one location. And they both made films. So Tsutsumi's film, I believe, was 2LDK in that year, and Kitamura's film, I believe, was Aragami. And in that director's duel, I actually prefer Tsutsumi's film, 2LDK, which is pretty interesting. Just a little backstory on that director. He's pretty good. Now, the DVD availability of Shinsei Toire no Hanako-san is that, unfortunately, it's difficult to find, kind of like Troublesome Night 3. You may be able to find a DVD somewhere, but it may or may not be with subs. Alright. So now we've hit the best 2 Asian horror films from 1998. I think most fans of Asian horror would likely agree on these 2 titles. And the first one I'm going to cover is, of course, Ringu, known simply as Ring in its home country, a Japanese horror film. A grainy, enigmatic videotape has the power to kill people 7 days after they watch it. A reporter investigates this tape, but risks her own life to do so. Robert Horton from Amazon wrote a very brief summary of his review that I think sums up this film nicely. And I would actually like to quote this little paragraph because I think he words it better than I could. So, quote, This brilliant premise fueled the 2002 Hollywood hit The Ring, but before that it conquered Japan in Ringu, Hideo Nakata's quietly unsettling study in terror. Now, fans of the US version will find a less elaborate storyline, but more primal fear in the original. The basic plot, however, still has a worried reporter, played by Nanako Matsushima, tracking down the meaning of the video, and, having watching it herself, she has only a week to work. The film's calm, economic style actually adds to the creeping sense of dread throughout, and the hair-curling set pieces stand out in contrast. Like an old photograph of something evil, Ringu has a strange but familiar power to unnerve. Guaranteed its effect will linger for at least 7 days. Longer if you're lucky. Unquote. That's nicely put, I think. It has a nice little summary of the film. Ring it's a contemporary classic. A lot of you know this, but the few that don't, now you know. It moves deliberately, but the viewer is certainly rewarded with a relentlessly ominous tone and a number of creepy scenes. I mean, this movie has one of the scariest opening credits that I've ever seen. It's I think it's that shot of the dimly lit ocean with the backdrop of a threatening score. I mean, right from the opening seconds, this film hits you pretty hard. It gets you right into the mood. Now, the climactic ending is, of course, very haunting. As Sadako's body movements are twisted and eerie. That's one thing I really like about the Onryo ghost when it's used. It's very unnatural in its movements, which really creeps me out most of the time, especially when it's executed well. When I watch Ring, it legitimately scares me. And I'm someone who, in terms of getting scared, I don't get scared that often when watching horror films, but I am very good at suspending my disbelief. So I very easily immerse myself into films. So it's not very difficult to scare me, but it's also not very easy. So I think I have a nice balance there. And Ringu, it creeps me out pretty good. I think this film, it's almost like it blends the scariest advantages of found footage horror with the advantages of conventional storytelling. So you get, a lot of people like to criticize the modern day found footage films, like Blair Witch Project and that type of thing. Ringu actually has a little bit of that flavor to it, because they find the tape and they watch it. But for the most part, it's a very traditional dramatic narrative. So it kind of maximizes the value of both types of horror film, and I think that's one of its advantages. I think this film definitely deserves its accolades, too. Anyone interested in Japanese horror has to watch it. There's simply no excuse not to. It's widely available on DVD, so make sure you check it out. And there actually used to be a box set with Ringu called Ringu Anthology of Terror, which I think included Ringu, Ringu 2, Raisin, and Ringu 0, all in one box set. I don't think it's still in print. I think it's out of print, but you can easily find it used. I think I saw it on Amazon used for a fairly reasonable price. So if you're ready to just dive into the Ringu franchise, you may as well just get the box set if you can find it. So that's Ringu. Now, we move on to the last film here that we will cover for 1998, and that is Whispering Corridors from South Korea. Now, this is about an intrepid teacher at an all-girls school whose prying ways are awarded with a murder mystery she now must unravel. Now, after a handful of students turn up dead, administrators scramble to cover up the deaths and pass them off as suicides. A betrayal that spurs our protagonist into action. But, like the proverbial cat, the curious educator may be marked for death. So, this horror film makes statements on the topics of friend abandonment and the controversial subject of teacher abuse in South Korea. South Korea, it's not rare. I should reword that. It's somewhat often when South Korea will make kind of a message film that touches upon contemporary or prior day issues, which is kind of nice because it kind of educates Western viewers on some of the problems of South Korean society. This one definitely touches upon the, as I said, the teacher abuse in South Korea. Some of the teachers are pretty, maybe exceed their bounds in terms of educating the students and inflicting discipline, so to speak. Now, Whispering Corridors is one of the more character and plot-based horror films, even more so than you might expect. Almost all of the schoolgirls are effectively developed through a well-written script. And this quality is also maintained for many of the sequels, because this film spurred 4 sequels to it. So there's 5 films in total to the series. And they all, in general, have that basic quality to it. It's one of the defining characteristics of this franchise. For all the horror films that use young women or high school girls as their characters, especially their protagonists, very few have showcased and developed the actual concept of schoolgirl friendship as well as Whispering Corridors has. And even as a guy watching the movie, I really found it very interesting to watch these schoolgirls develop their friendships and see that theme develop. You know what I mean? Because as a guy, that's not something that I would experience throughout my lifetime. When you have schoolgirls interacting with each other when there's no guys around, as a guy, you're not going to know what goes on there. And this film kind of touches upon that a little bit. It develops that nicely, and I find that interesting. These movies have a very almost romanticized or sentimental tone to them due to the themes, and that adds a lot of dramatic weight to it. I think that the lighting during the nighttime scenes uses a nice moody shade of blue, and the autumn season actually in this first film of the franchise is captured quite well. The ghost, the character design of the ghost is more classical and humanized, so it's not like the Japanese onryo that you would see in Ringu. This one's more of a humanized ghost, so there's differences there. And one aspect, though, that might throw off some viewers with this film is that the story is occasionally shown in a fragmented structure that requires some thought to piece things together. I personally really enjoy that aspect, but some people may need a second viewing to catch everything. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's convoluted, but maybe it is a little bit. So, there's some scenes where you'll be like, wait, I'm a little confused as to what's going on here. But it eventually starts to make sense and blends together. So I think I did need actually a second viewing to really piece everything together in this one. But just a worthy note for you. So overall, though, Whispering Corridors is an excellent example of high-quality horror. And one of the sequels, though, I actually like better than the first installment. We'll get to that one. So DVD availability now of Whispering Corridors is that it is widely available on DVD. And I think just like Ringu, there's a box set available. I think it's called I should have looked it up. It's called like the Ghost School box set or something like that. You can definitely find it on Amazon. But there's a box set out there, Whispering Corridors. Again, if you want to make the dive and just go all in on the franchise, that's available for you. Now, I would suspect that most fans and critics would choose Ring as their personal favorite from 1998 in terms of Asian horror. But personally, if absolutely forced to choose between Ringu and Whispering Corridors, I might actually give the slight edge to Whispering Corridors because I think the pacing is a little bit better. Not to say that the Ringu's pacing is bad, but I don't know, there's something about Whispering Corridors that really, I just find it overall a little bit more engaging on a minute-by-minute basis. And maybe it's because the storyline structure's a little bit more difficult to get a hold of, and you have to think a little bit more to piece things together. That might be why I prefer it slightly more. But Ring is easily the scarier of the two, I think. So Ring definitely scared me more, but Whispering Corridors I find slightly more interesting. So those are my thoughts on those, but they're both great films. So all right, so that does it for 1998, an important year for Asian horror due to reasons mentioned in my last video. But the overall quality of this year, I believe, is not particularly exceptional. Of the 13 films I covered, I enjoyed 6 of them, and only 2 of them I would consider to be great, at least in my opinion. Now, definitely a good year for the industry, but you will see some improvements as we reach the mid-2000s. So be sure to join me in my next video in this playlist when we will dig into 1999. And as always, we'll see you next time.